Crispin, for the audience, I think a lot of people know who you are. George McFly is an iconic movie character. Must be something knowing that hundreds of millions of people know who you are. I'm not sure they know who you are by name, but they certainly know who you are by face.
My experience is that when people come up and talk to me, they usually know me from multiple things. I've been in, I don't know, I think I have to count it on the IMDb, but I think it's about somewhere, but I think I have like 50 things that I've been in listed on the IMDb, or over 50, and about 40 or so of those are films. So usually people, when they come up and they approach me, they've seen me in multiple things. And often, people do ask me by my name. So but I never know what it's going to be. Sometimes it can be just some strange, obscure thing. It could be even a talk show. I've had that happen where people just saw me on a talk show and they've never seen me in anything else. Mm-hmm. And an obscure talk show, like not something that you would expect people would know me from. It's a funny thing.
And you played George McFly when you were 20 years old, so you've been around for
That's right.
quite a while now.
And I had been acting for 7 years before I played that role. I started professionally when I was 13. So I'm 47. So I've been, how many years is that? 36 years? I don't even know. Math is 34 years.
All right.
So that's a long time.
And what gets a 13-year-old into acting?
Well, my father's an actor, and my mother retired as a dancer and actress when I was born. And so I grew up understanding really how the business worked. I didn't have a particularly glamorized view of the business. My father, he still acts, and he's in my second film, which is part of why I'm here to be, promoting the tour that I'm about to go on with my two films. What Is It? And the second film, its sequel, Everything Is Fine, or It Is Fine, Everything Is Fine. Mm-hmm. And then I perform 2 live shows before each of the films. I have 2 separate shows when the films play on subsequent nights at the venues. My first stop is later this week on Friday and Saturday in Nashville at the Belcourt Theater. After that, the next weekend in Chicago at the Music Box Theater. Then during the week, right after that, I'll be in Columbus, Ohio at the Grandview Theater. And then I will be at Penn State University at the Penn Theater. I think that's on Friday. Well, all of the exact dates are on my website on CrispinGlover.com. I think it's Friday the 20th. Then I go into Buffalo the next weekend, or just before the weekend, and I think it's at Market Arcade Film and Arts Center, and then I go up into Ottawa, Canada. So far, that's what I have booked. But there may be some more things coming up in February, but that'll take me all the way through January. But yeah, my father's an actor. Both of my parents are in the second film. My mother retired as a dancer and an actress when I was born. But I'd grown up around the business, and it was a business decision that I made at a young age. 13 it sounds young in a certain way, but as far as for being a child actor, it's actually a little bit late. And the reason for that is most child actors start when they're 6, 7, 8 years old because their parents kind of push them into it, which I do think can be a very damaging thing. My parents did not in any way, shape, or form push me into the acting industry. It was something that I had decided that would be a good idea for me to do, and then I talked to my parents about it, and then they were supportive of it. I had initially started thinking of it really when I was about 11 or so, and then I got an agent when I was 13. But like I say, it's actually late because many kids, they've been working around that time, and I remember at that time kind of thinking there are all these kind of named child actors, and I didn't really work a lot as a kid. I didn't really start working until I turned 18 when the child labor laws started working for me. And that's when I started working a lot more in film and working a lot more in general.
You were on the facts. You were on the Facts of Life. The kid with the 200 IQ.
That's right. Yeah. I was. I did about, I don't know, five. I don't know how many television shows I did, but I stopped doing television shows after I stopped being a teenager. And I mean, I've still done some.
You were on Happy Days.
Appearances.
You were on Happy Days.
That's right. Yeah, I was 19.
Had they jumped the shark by then?
No, I was 18 when I was on Happy Days. What is I know the term "jump the shark," but I actually don't know what it means. What does that mean?
There's an episode where the Fonz literally surfboards over a shark, and it was at that moment that basically the show crossed the line from being a normal show to being ridiculous. So
it actually comes from Happy Days. I didn't know that. No, but I did have the. I actually on that show said the line, "It's the Fonz." I said that. That's funny. But actually, he was really nice. Henry Winkler was really a nice and good actor to work with. He was very generous and wanted you to look good, which I appreciate.
Are you typecast in Hollywood now?
Typecasting is a strange thing. Of course, there's a negative connotation when somebody says that word, and I understand what it means. But there's a lot of ways of thinking about it. If you think about someone like, I don't know, Peter Lorre, on one hand, you could say, okay, Peter Lorre, if you were to use a negative term, you could say, well, he was typecast as playing, like you were saying, nervous, crazy, creepy character. But on the other hand, you can also say there's an iconic element of Peter Lorre that you look at him and you think of something when you think of Peter Lorre. So I don't necessarily think of it as being a negative thing. There can be frustrations, and like if you want to be working and then somebody doesn't want to think of you as something other than just one kind of thing, of course there's negative connotations for that. But the amount of work that I do, especially having to do with my own shows and films that I tour with, I don't think about it that much. I think if I were only acting in other people's films, I probably would think about it more, and I probably would become more frustrated by it. But as it is, I have so many things that I do, and it takes up so much of my time. It's hard for me to be concerned. I actually did just get an offer for a part for an independent film that was a very different kind of role for me than I'm usually offered, which I want to do it. I'm not sure if that film, it's an independent, and you never know until you're actually filming on independence if it's going to come about. But I'm not that concerned about it, really. It's I like to play different kinds of roles, but I've always been very attracted. It's really much of my own doing that I've been attracted to more unusual kinds of psychologies of characters.
Do you use the method? What's the name for that?
Well, that's proper. The people call something the method, and it comes from I always forget his name. There's Stanislavski is the Russian who wrote To the Actor, and he wrote he's a great Russian acting teacher. Then there's another fellow that starts with an S. He's also famous, and who literally came up with the term method, but it's Stanislavski derived. What's the fellow's name? He was in The Godfather, the second.
Yeah,
Godfather
everyone says
film.
Marlon Brando. That's the association.
No. That's not who I'm talking about.
De Niro?
Marlon Brando's. No. I'm not talking. He's not a famous actor. There's a person that came up with the term right now. I should look it up. But it's a kind of confused term, when people say method, and it's why I go into detail, because it's because he's also a relatively famous name, and I always forget his name for some reason. But basically, all of the Marlon Brando era acting teachers, Lee Strasberg, that's his name. Strasberg is the fellow that came up with the term method. Marlon Brando's teacher wasn't Strasberg. Marlon Brando's teacher was a female.
Oh, that was Olivier. Okay.
No, Olivier was not Marlon Brando's teacher. No, Stella Adler was Marlon Brando's teacher, and Stella Adler, Lee Strasberg, a whole bunch of contemporaries in the 1950s and 1940s were people that were utilizing various aspects of Stanislavski's techniques. If you read Stanislavski's books on acting, or rather to the actor or building a character, you can see that a lot of those acting teachers that came out in the 40s and the 50s were basing their concepts on Stanislavski, and Strasberg was one of them, and he's the guy who came up with the term method acting. But the concepts of what the specifics of method are came out earlier than that term method acting. Stanislavski took a portion, as so did Stella Adler, and so did a lot of these other teachers, took portions of what Stanislavski had written about it, and really made techniques based around portions of Stanislavski's techniques. And of course, I'm sure they came up with their own concepts as well. But the main Strasberg tended toward sticking with something called emotional recall, and that's not something Stella Adler did, and that's not something that Brando did. But Brando will be called a method actor, even though he didn't study specifically with Strasberg. He did study with Stella Adler. But beyond the idea of this specific term method, what's more important is the concepts behind the Stanislavski and Russian-based ideas, which are getting into the psychologies of the characters. And there's a lot of different techniques one can use to get into those psychological elements, and yes, that is something that I'm very interested in, and definitely know that those things are important to utilize. But there's a mix-up with the term method, because people think somebody stays in character. Which there's a great confusion about what it is, and I think
that's what the average person's interpretation of that means.
Right.
That they're living that character on and off the screen.
Well, and even that term, it's like there are different people that are going to do things differently. For me, what's important about understanding the psychology is the concentration. The concentration, you can be working on a stage or you can be working in film. In film, what's important is that your concentration when the camera is running is strong enough that you're able to be into the psychology of the character at that moment. When somebody is saying that they're living the character, staying in character on and off screen, the reason that they would want to be doing that is because they want their concentration to be strong enough when the camera is running, so that they feel that the psychology of the character is true. Now, it might be that, if somebody feels that their concentration is going to be fulfilled most strongly if they're staying in character, so to speak, on and off camera, then it's good for that person to do that. Personally, for me, I find that if I don't relate to people when I'm off camera as a regular person, my concentration would become, I would feel like obligated to kind of like say why I was doing what I was doing to those people off camera if I was to be so-called staying in character. So I feel like it actually would damage my concentration to do that. I feel like it's better for me to just get into my concentration in my head and and then off camera be relating to the crew and the people, in whatever way I need to make sure that the scene is well performed. I've had it happen where there was one director in particular that wanted the situation to be where his actors stayed in character. And when the whole crew and the cast and everybody is in on that same concentration and that same idea, then it's great. It's basically a theater game, and everybody's on the same page, and that's really good. I feel like it can be distracting personally for me if everybody isn't on that same page, and that would hurt my own concentration, so I don't do that. But again, if I were in a situation where that was the whole element, I'm totally into it. And for actors that feel that it's good for their concentration, I'm totally supportive of it. So that's how I feel about it.
So it would be safe to say that you were concentrating when you were on the Letterman show in the wig, and
well, I see what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. With the David Letterman show, what people what I always say in media, what I always say when I do in interviews is that I neither confirm nor deny that I was ever on the David Letterman show. So you can make of that what you will.
Well, you were clearly in character. I mean, but it's interesting fodder on the internet, and it certainly makes it more interesting and makes you more mysterious. A lot of people will ask the question, is Crispin Glover a madman or a genius? That's posted on a lot of different forums. What do you make of that?
I mean, I'm fine with all of it. It's like I don't really for one thing, that particular episode of the David Letterman that you're talking about, I think that was in 1986. So we're in another mathematical situation.
Well, I'll tell you, I was 7 at the time. Yeah.
It's 24 years ago, so it's a long time ago. So and I like I say, I don't really try to discount or continue to what's the word I'm looking for? I'm not trying to address it one way or another. I really, my own filmmaking that I am touring around with. The first title of the first film is called "What Is It?", which is a question. And I should talk about that a little bit. But I like things that form questions. Mm-hmm. Most of the actors in the first film, What Is It?, have Down syndrome. But the film's not about Down syndrome whatsoever. What it really is my psychological reaction to the corporate constraints that have happened in the last 30 years, where in anything that can possibly make an audience member uncomfortable, where it's something that can truly make people question things, is necessarily excised. Another word for truly questioning is something that is taboo. And I think that's actually a very damaging thing. When the taboo, when is ubiquitously excised, it's that moment when an audience member sits back in their chair, looks up at the screen and thinks to themselves, is this right what I'm watching? Is this wrong what I'm watching? Should I be here? Should the filmmaker have done this? What is it? And that's the title of the first film. What is it that's taboo in the culture? What does it mean when the taboo has been ubiquitously excised?
But studios,
I think it's a very
But studios make this decision for you, though. They tell you what the belief system is and what you're supposed to be feeling.
I totally agree with that, which I think is terrible. Because it's that moment when people are asking questions that's when real education is happening. And when people are not asking questions, or when the films are not asking questions, or neither of these things are happening, it's the opposite of education. It's exactly what you described. The opposite of education is propaganda. And unfortunately, what we're having right now is a propagandistic studio system, and it's horrible for our culture.
Listen, we'll do an entire segment about What Is It right after the break. Crispin, tell me about this show of yours. What is it? And it's a part of the It series, right? There's a trilogy.
That's right. The first film is called What Is It, which you're just talking about a bit. The second film is called It Is Fine, Everything Is Fine. The third film, which has not yet been filmed, is called It Is Mine. But the second film I'll also be showing on this tour. I show them on subsequent nights. So actually the first night, I show it out of order. I show It Is Fine, Everything Is Fine, which is part 2 of the trilogy first. And then I show What Is It, which is part 1 of the trilogy on the second night. I also perform 2 different live shows before each of the films. Before What Is It, I perform Crispin and Glover's Big Slideshow Part 1, and before It Is Fine, Everything Is Fine, I perform Crispin and Glover's Big Slideshow Part 2. First, I'll tell you about the content of the second film, It Is Fine, Everything Is Fine, and then I'll tell you a bit about what the slideshows are, if that sounds good. Mm-hmm. It Is Fine, Everything Is Fine. I wrote and directed What Is It? But It Is Fine, Everything Is Fine was written by one of the actors that is in What Is It? His name was Stephen C. Stewart. He'd been born with a severe case of cerebral palsy, and he's also the main actor in It Is Fine, Everything Is Fine. I had written Steve into What Is It when I expanded What Is It from what was originally a short film into a feature film. And the reason I did it was because I had read Steve's screenplay about 10 years before we shot What Is It? I read it way back in 1986. And as soon as I read his screenplay, I knew I'd be the person that would have to fund it and produce it. Mm-hmm. And he had been born with a severe case of cerebral palsy. It was very difficult to understand. And when his mother died when he was in his early 20s, she would, he was placed into a nursing home, and he really didn't want to be there. And the people that were taking care of him there would derisively call him an MR, a mental retard, which isn't a nice thing to say to anybody, but Steve was of normal intelligence. And the emotional turmoil that he must have gone through, I can't even begin to imagine. He did get out about 10 years after he'd been placed there, and when he got out, he wrote this screenplay. And he wrote it in the style of a 1970s TV murder mystery movie of the week, wherein he's the bad guy. And this was something that was really important to Steve. If you think about it, if you see a movie or a television show where somebody has a disability, usually they'll be portrayed by somebody without a disability, but even whether they are or aren't, basically that character with a disability will be a benefactor to society.
They're the good guy, yeah.
Yeah, and that's okay. That's very well and good. There are plenty of people with disabilities that are benefactors to society. But what was really important to Steve, and he wrote about this, is that he was a person with a disability. Emphasis on a person, and a person can have dark thoughts, and he wanted this character to be a person with dark thoughts, and he does. And he does very bad things, and he's a bad guy. And because Steve wrote it in this style of this TV murder mystery movie of the week from the 70s, there are certain truths that come out that if he had written it as like a standard autobiography, those truths somehow may not have the same kind of beautiful dynamic that they have in his film. And really, there's an emotional catharsis that happens with Steve's character and the audience in this film that is very strong. And when the whole trilogy is done, the best film of the trilogy will be this film. It Is Fine, Everything Is Fine. But not only that, I feel like it'll be the best film I'll have anything to do with in my whole career. I'm really strong. I'm very passionate about the film. And I don't mean to dismiss What Is It, because I'm passionate about that film as well. But it's this emotional catharsis with the Stephen C. Stewart character. I hold that on a very high level, a very high value. But I want people to see both of the films. What Is It has things in it that Everything Is Fine doesn't have, and I feel very strongly about both of them. But before each of the films, like I say, I perform a live show. What this show is, in the 1980s and very early 90s, I took a lot of old books from the 1800s and reworked them and turned them into different books from what they originally were. And they're heavily illustrated. When I first published one of the books, it was called Rat Catching. I published that in 1988. And people said to me, well, you really should have a book reading. Authors often have book readings to help sell the books. But because the book was so heavily illustrated, I knew that if I just read from the text, the illustrations moved the story along. And it really wouldn't make so much sense. So I knew I would have to have the illustrations from the books projected behind me as I read through them. It wasn't until 1992 or 3 that there was a festival up in Olympia, Washington, that wanted me to come up with a retrospect of the work I'd done up to that point, the films I'd been in, and I thought that's a good time to do the show. So I chose 8 different books out of about 22 or 3 that I'd made, and I did what is now called Crispin Glover's Big Slideshow Part 1, and it went over immediately really well, and I started touring around. I know you're up in Canada. Vancouver was one of the very first places I went up to perform the show, and I was getting good audiences, and Canada in general has always been a great place for me to go, but there in the United States, and I realized that I would be able to distribute my own films in this fashion. So I toured around with the slideshow a bit for a while. Then I kind of stopped for a long time while I was getting What Is It to my first print, the 35 millimeter print of the film, which took me a number of years. There were some technical issues that made it take a long time. And then I finally really started promoting both the slideshow and, of course, the feature film, as I was touring around and going into the cities like LA and New York. I didn't ever perform my slideshow in Los Angeles or New York until 2005 when I premiered What Is It, because I kind of saved it. I was experimenting with the show and kind of distribution tactics up through that time. But like I say, Vancouver, I've been in Vancouver probably more than most cities that I've been in anywhere in the world. It's been a great city over the years, and now where I regularly go is the Pacific Cinematheque, which is a terrific, really terrific venue. I plan to go back.
Could I find these movies online on some of these torrent sites?
No, I specifically do not let them out on digital, and there's multiple reasons for it. One of them is for if somebody were to just watch the film on its own, particularly What Is It, they would not get anywhere near the same experience that they would have when they see the 35 millimeter print, especially in the context of me performing the live show before it. The books somehow lead to a kind of a mindset that leads well into the film. And then I have a Q&A after each of the films. The Q&A is exceedingly important, especially for What Is It. It's so important to put that film in context. Because sometimes, the film does deal with taboo subjects that it can feel sometimes to some people like just a random set of elements that has been put together to bother people. And that
I saw the trailer for What Is It? And some of the imagery is a guy in blackface, there's swastikas on there, sexual things. The imagery is quite perverse.
Well, yeah, I mean, one can define it in a number of ways, but I don't sell the film that way. What I think is very important about the film is it's a reaction. It's a reaction to constraints that have happened in the corporate industry that do not allow anything at all that can genuinely cause discomfort. But it's like when you take something that standardly is not allowable in our corporate discourse, and it becomes a kind of a background or an element of the texture of the film, and it's not necessarily pointed to. That's the reason I don't sell the films that way, because yes, there are things in there that people can point at and say, oh, it's got this, this, and this, but it's not what the point of the film is. The point of the film ultimately is that those things aren't important. There's too much concern about what one shouldn't be dealing with or shouldn't be talking about, and the ways in which something should be dealt with. And I think what that leads to is propaganda. It limits the way that discourse can happen, and that limits thought. It limits thought, and there's nothing worse than that. There's a universe of ideas. There's a universe of things that could be happening in our film discourse, and it isn't. There's such a limited element of what is allowable in our corporate film community, and it's a shame. There's so much more we could be dealing with.
Well, let me ask you.
You
mentioned propaganda. Do you think Hollywood serves the artist or serves the government's party line?
Government is a strange word because when people hear the word government, they think about, people that are voted into office through the system called the democratic system in the U.S. But that in of itself is a misleading idea as to how things work, because what we really have is a corporate ownership of our culture, and it has a huge influence on what we're calling the government. But it's not just the government. It's a huge influence on our academia. It's a huge influence on our media. All of these things are heavily influenced by monetary, for lack of a better word, bribery. And this kind of Occupy movement that's going on, it's apparent that those people understand, and I think it's a good thing that they're going and doing those protests, but it's much more evident that those kind of banking interests are having corrupt influence over, political / business elements. What's less evident is that those same kind of corporate interests are having equivalent, if not fuller, influence over our media, over our films. But because we've grown up with this as this kind of thought process as our instructional propaganda, if somebody questions or goes outside of that propagandistic element, it's highly questionable. If you go outside of it, what you're doing is easily pointed at as being bad, as being wrong. You're not supposed to have this kind of imagery. You're not supposed to have these kinds of people or treat them in this particular way. Which is like, why not? Ultimately, I have a very strong morality. I have a strong moral sense, and I don't believe in being cruel to people. I don't believe in being cruel to animals, all of this kind of thing. But when it comes to the point that you are not able to communicate certain kinds of thoughts because it's considered the wrong thing to do, specifically by corporate interests, what is it other than propaganda? And that specifically is exactly what's happening in our film industry. And of course, I work in the corporate film industry, and I've had great experiences, and I like the people that I work with. And when I go and I work in the corporate film industry, I don't have a bad attitude. In fact, I'm very grateful to be involved in it. But I would like to help expand the vocabulary and thought processes that are are currently able to be dealt with in the community. And I very much specify the last 30 years, because someone like, say, Stanley Kubrick, who's one of my cinematic heroes, this is somebody who not only did he work in the corporate film industry, but he worked in the studio film industry. And he came up with some of the most beautifully cinematic, questioning, thoughtful films ever made. And I know that there is a waxing and waning in the kind of control that is happening currently in the corporate film industry. And I'm quite confident that even my own filmmaking, and I self-distribute my own films, I think it's quite plausible that there will be a time when my own filmmaking will align to what corporate interests are. And if I can help have that kind of influence, that would be fantastic. And if for whatever reason I can't, I'm very glad to be able to go out and talk with the people and I have my book signings at the end of the shows. People come up and ask questions, and of course I have the Q&A at the end. So I have a genuine discourse with the people that are supporting what it is that I'm doing, and I'm very grateful to those people.
Does your private filmmaking serve to pay reparations for the work that you do with the corporate film industry?
Phrase it another way. I don't know what you mean.
Are you dancing with the devil, so to speak, to make your monies in order so you can do good things with the private work you're doing?
Yeah. Essentially, that's accurate. It's like when I was in Back to the Future, this film very much informed me, although it took me a long time to realize it, about how things work. I had certain questions about what was being said in that film. Specifically, I had a question to Robert Zemeckis about what I felt it was a bad message to have the characters come back and have money given to them at the end of the film. I thought that it sent a bad idea out. And I know there are people that love the film, so I've been very careful about it. But I've been accused by one of the people involved in that of things that aren't true. Somebody named Bob Gale, who's the co-writer and co-producer on it, who's made all kinds of lies up about me, because there ended up being a lawsuit because I wasn't in the second film, and they put another actor into false nose, chin, and cheekbones in order to make him look like me, and interspliced footage of me from the original film to fool audiences to believing I was in the film. Because of my lawsuit, there are laws in the Screen Actors Guild that make it so producers, directors, and actors can never do something like that again. And I'm proud of the lawsuit. But I've been very careful about not talking about it. But this fellow, Bob Gale, can't take the fact that what he did was wrong, so he's made up these lies to make it look as though it was right for them to do this illegal thing, which of course isn't right. But what it stemmed from, and part of the reason that I wasn't in the sequels to the film, is because when working on the original film, I was 20 years old. I had been seeing all of the films, when I was 16, starting to professionally study acting, I would go to all of the revival theaters in Los Angeles and go see the movies that were made. Most of these films, it was 1980 when I was 16, they were films from the 60s and 70s that were questioning things. This was what I thought I was stepping into as a young actor. I thought, great, I'm stepping into this community of people that wants to question things that should be questioned. So when I had this discourse with Robert Zemeckis, I thought this was kind of the right thing to do. I thought this was kind of serving, I wouldn't have put this vocabulary now, but I think that message is serving corporate interests. What I thought should happen is that the characters should be in love. And that's where the film should end, with the idea that, sure, they could make money. It's okay to make money. It's not that that's a bad thing. But I thought the message should be that they're in love, and not that they are getting cash, and not that the son should be jumping up when he has his new truck in the garage. This led to a lot of trouble. Robert Zemeckis was very angry with me. Well, all of those situations, and having been through the lawsuit and then having been talked about badly and lies made up, it did make me see very clearly how when people align themselves toward a certain kind of corporate sensibility, it's negative, and this is how propaganda ends up working in our culture. It's not a committee That's why even the word propaganda sometimes people bristle at, because I mean, you're up in Canada, and I have noticed there's a difference with Canadian audiences and U.S. audiences. U.S. audiences tend toward getting much more upset specifically about what is it than when I cross the border anywhere in the world, including Canada. Canada has a different, at least a slightly different media system, and it can see some of those propagandas that the U.S. does not necessarily see in itself. And it's, of course, hard. I don't blame people in the U.S. to not see it. It's ubiquitous. It's very difficult to get outside of that kind of system because it's everywhere.
I think the world would see Americans as somewhat uptight. They're descended from the Puritans, so...
Well, there's that. And there is some truth in that as well, but it also has to do with money that's being put into the academia, into the government, and into media in general. And the money that goes into those systems has influence on those systems. It wants people to think and work a specific way in order to serve those interests. Of course, it works that way. Why wouldn't it work that way? I mean, on some level, of course, it would be nice to think that there are a lot of people with a lot of money that want the whole culture to run nicely and everybody to be happy. But for the most part, unfortunately, the monetary systems want the working or lower classes to be serving them in the best way possible, and they'll do what they can with their money to make that happen. And it's effective. It's worked. And it isn't a new thing. You know, it's been going on forever. But there are, like I say, there are times when it waxes and wanes in control. And I think there's a particularly tight control that's been going on in the last 30 years. And maybe the prior 20 years to that, there was kind of a waning in the control.
Crispin, we've run long here, so we'll take a break. During the break, Crispin and I were chatting, and I said to Crispin, you know, the work that you're doing is the kind of thing that can get us out of this corporatocracy-driven entertainment media. Basically, what we need is a paradigm shift in the culture, you know, that's outside of the mainstream media.
Yeah, and I agree that it's not. There's certainly these my own films. What is it? And It Is Fine, Everything Is Fine are art house films, and they don't. I know that there is a limit on the amount of commerciality to these particular films, which is okay. I'm fine with it. But there's no question that these films are not the films that would get the culture out of it at large. They're too specialized. But what is important is that there is no question there's an awareness that is a growing awareness that is coming about in the culture at large that is realizing these things do need to shift. There is a metaphor on some level, which is an artistic and poetic metaphor that relates to these kind of political these socio-political monetary elements that other people are reacting to, especially in the last couple of years. And I've been touring with these films for 6 years, and I've been talking about this specific topic for 6 years. It is not a coincidence. This is something that is a real thing. There is real control going on in our media, and it's more evident in politics. But they're entirely related, and it takes so many people to be having this expanded awareness, and to be a part of that expanded awareness is absolutely right on. I'm totally into that, and obviously there's a lot of other people that need to be continuing to do that kind of thing, and then certain kinds of change could happen.
You know, speaking of, you've worked with Werner Herzog, who actually I recently got in contact with. He's too busy to do the show at this time, but I was looking forward to maybe getting him on the show. Yeah. What's your experiences working with him? He's very much an activist.
Oh, yeah. Herzog is, I don't know if he'd even call himself an activist necessarily, but in the same way that there's a metaphor for thought a metaphor for genuine individualized thought. He's somebody that has been a huge influence on me in many ways. Specifically, What Is It? It has one of his films is a huge influence on that film. His film called Even Dwarves Started Small, another film called Fata Morgana. Both of those films have very strong influence on What Is It in different ways, and I did some commentary with another person and Herzog on the Anchor Bay DVD releases for those films. I first met Herzog in 1990 at the Venice Film Festival when I was there with a Polish-French film production. It's a film that never was released in the U.S. called Ferdy Dirk. And the publicist for Ferdy Dirk was also working for Herzog, and I told that publicist how much I admired Herzog, and he said, "Oh, well, you'll have to go out. We'll have to go out for dinner." So I got to sit and ask Herzog anything I wanted. It was just me and the publicist and a woman there, and it was fantastic. And then I've run into him here and there. I got to do those some questions for him on the DVDs, and he coincidentally was premiering Grizzly Man at Sundance in 2005 when I was premiering What Is It? And I went and saw Grizzly Man, and he came and saw What Is It, the premiere of What Is It? And he was just so supportive and great. And to have a mentor, a cinematic mentor like that, be nice to you, and it's fantastic. And another person that actually was supportive and nice as a cinematic mentor is David Lynch. Both Herzog and David Lynch have been great in very different ways.
Have you acted in any Lynch films?
Yeah, I was in Wild at Heart, and then I was in an HBO pilot that he did called Hotel Room. And then he actually, the part of why What Is It came about was because Lynch had read the screenplay for It Is Mine and had said he would executive produce that film for me to direct. Wow. What Is It was originally going to be a short film to promote the idea. What happened was I went to one of the corporate entities in Los Angeles after Lynch had said that he would executive produce the film. One of these corporate entities that funds so-called independent films. And after a number of meetings and conversations, they let me know they were concerned about funding a film wherein a majority of the characters were played by actors with Down syndrome. So it was decided that I should write a short screenplay to promote this as being a viable idea. I did that. It was like a 20-page screenplay called What Is It? All of the actors in it originally, when it was a short film, had Down syndrome. After I edited that together, we shot that in 4 days, and the first cut came in. It took me about 6 months to edit, and it came in at about 85 minutes. It was too long for how much footage I had, but I realized with more work, I could turn it into a feature film, and that's when I started expanding it. But I also simultaneously realized it was at that time that the purpose of having the majority of the characters be played by actors with Down syndrome in the original screenplay, It Is Mine, it served a different purpose than it does in What Is It? I had two young writers had come to me with a screenplay, and I felt it fixed a certain problem there was in their screenplay, and I was going to direct it and rewrite it. But I realized, so my purpose of making What Is It? Originally, I didn't have actors with Down syndrome in it because with the idea that was taboo. And in fact, that isn't taboo. What is taboo is that I'm having actors with Down syndrome playing characters that do not necessarily have Down syndrome. That's something that can possibly make people uncomfortable. It can make people question, like, why is he doing that? Is he making fun of these people? Is he taking advantage of these people? There are all these things that corporations don't want to get into. They don't want these questions to be asked. Corporate interests want no questions. And I realized that I innately had a taboo subject matter without even having tried to. I wasn't thinking about it in the first place. And I realized there were some other issues that had taboo elements, and I thought, all right, this is what, as I expand this into a feature, this is a point, this is a real thing that I need to get into. And that really is what's very important about the film ultimately.
Well, maybe it's a good question. Are these freak shows?
No. And There is a beautiful film made by Todd Browning in 1933 called Freaks, which is one of the most beautiful films ever made. An unusual kind of movie. Specifically in What Is It, the characters are being played by actors with Down syndrome, but again, those characters do not have Down syndrome necessarily. So it's not, I think the definition of a freak show, if you wanted to say that, is when somebody is pointing out an element of themselves that is to be put on display for that element of itself. And that is not what's happening in either What Is It or Everything Is Fine. It's getting into Everything Is Fine, specifically written by Stephen C. Stewart, really is getting into the psychology of a person that had a very particular situation. Really more of it has to do with two different things that have nothing to do with him having cerebral palsy. One of them is the fact that he'd been locked into this nursing home, which I'm sure was really, he did not like that. I know that. And the other element, which we haven't talked about, is he had a particular interest in women with long hair. And that plays a very great part of the story and the cinematic aspects of the film. And it almost is, I could almost argue that it's a more important aspect than the fact that he had cerebral palsy. But so it's a very specific cinematic study, and it has less to do with his physical elements and has more to do with his psychological elements.
There are certain things that seem to be recurring in your work. I notice volcanoes comes up. Your company is Volcanic Eruptions.
Yeah.
What's that about?
Well,
rats too, and that's the other one.
I was just answering. I actually almost didn't even think about it until just recently, but the first thing that I wanted to be before I firmly decided to be an actor, when I was, 8, 9, 10, I was very interested in geology, and I wanted to be a geologist. But my concept of what a geologist was somebody that would, walk around with a pith helmet and one of those hammers with a spike at the end that you could open up a geode and you'd find a geode with fascinating crystals.
Like an archaeologist, so to speak, yeah.
Well, an archaeologist, of course, finds ancient civilizations, but in the way that an archaeologist is finding things, this is what I was kind of thinking. A geologist would find beautiful geological formations. But then I realized, really, probably a geologist would be somebody that would have to be hired by an international corporation to find petroleum deposits around the world.
It's a boring job, for sure.
Probably isn't what I wanted to do, and I think that's when I ended up deciding it would probably be good to go into acting. It really was around that time. That was my interest before that.
Mm-hmm.
So I've always had an interest in. I still like tectonic plates. I like elements about the mysteries of what goes on inside of the Earth, but also just the mysteries of the universe at large. I have a lot of interest in these fascinating topics. But I had to come up with a name for when I first started publishing my books. It actually happened as a last-minute thing. It's kind of a long, involved story, but I was thinking, should I call it Volcanic Press, Volcanic Publications, and somebody that was familiar with I was making a lot of sculptures of volcanoes at the time. They said, you should just call it Volcanic Eruptions. And I thought,
I've seen the farm animals caught in La Brea tar pits one, too.
Right. Very similar. It's something about this viscous fluid emanating from deep within the Earth. There's some interesting mystery about time and geological time is a really interesting
element of fertility to it.
Sure. Yeah. Stuff, organic material coming out. And of course, it's fascinating that really tar and these petroleum elements are coming from very ancient living elements that had utilized the sun to live, and now that sun energy has been trapped within the petroleum energy and then is being reutilized, which I'm still, that's another political element, but, all of this stuff about gasoline and petroleum, it does seem strange that we're taking all of this ancient material that used sun and like burning it to get the sun out of it. I'm quite certain there would be a lot of other ways of just directly accessing the sun for its own energetic sources, but that's a whole other subject.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. We have these laptops and all these home conveniences, and we're running them with coal-powered reactors.
Yeah,
this is, ancient technology.
It doesn't seem right, and I'm not an expert, but I've always thought the use of sun seems highly underused.
What about rats? You did the movie Willard.
Oh, yeah, that's a funny coincidence because rat catching was not the first book I made,
right.
But I used to live off of Hollywood Boulevard. There was a bookstore I walked into. I took old bindings from the 1800s and reworked them, and sitting on a table fairly prominently was an old book from the 1800s called Rat Catching. I thought, wow, that's great. I bought it right away. And I started working on that book in 1984. It was right before I acted in Back to the Future. I did quite a bit of work on that, and then I put it down and picked it back up after finishing shooting Back to the Future and realized I didn't have that much more work to do. And I finished it off fairly quickly after that. I didn't publish it till 1988. And then when I made Willard in 2003, which of course has to do with somebody that's interested in and communicates with rats,
yeah.
I thought, well, even if this film doesn't do well, it's going to increase my book sales for rat catching, and it did. So
it was a cross-promotion, so to speak.
Yeah, it was just a funny coincidence.
Crispin, we'll take a break. Is Crispin Glover a madman or a genius? I think he's sort of proved or answered that question with this interview.
That's what I see.
I won't even answer it for the audience. They'll have to come to that conclusion themselves. A friend of mine told me he's seen you on the bus here in town.
Yeah, I'm sure it's accurate. I've been in Vancouver many times over the years. Like I say, it's one of the places I've played my show more than any other cities. And even before I was playing at the Pacific Cinematheque, I think it was the second or third of my time I ever did the slideshow was I think it was called the York. I don't think it's open anymore. And that was before I was showing a 35 millimeter print of the film. So it was some kind of venue that was a bar that had been an old theater. But, and then I acted in Willard there. I acted in Hot Tub Time Machine there. So
Love that movie.
Yeah, I had a great time working on both of those films. I've had really good experiences being in Vancouver. After when I was shooting Willard, it was perfect timing. It was just before as spring was, I guess, about to end. So I was able to go up to, I think it's called Cypress. It's the name of a tree. It's a ski place. I'm a skier.
That's right. Yeah.
They had night skiing, and I was able to, almost every day after filming, able to go and do night skiing. It was fantastic. And then, I don't always like to rent a car. Like when I was working on Hot Tub Time Machine, I was flying back and forth to LA a lot, so I didn't need a rental car. So I would take the bus just up. I was staying at, I think, the Sutton Place. And so I would take the bus to Capers or up and down that main street. It's a good public transportation system. Whenever I can, I use public transportation. I don't like taxis. I like actually just getting on the bus and going where I need to go.
But people must approach you all the time.
It depends. It depends on where I am and what I'm doing. I didn't find that happened so much in Vancouver. It does happen more when I'm by myself. It happens most in the United States, but it's not like so much that it becomes a true distraction in my life. I mean, it will happen every day or even a lot on certain days, but it's never been a situation where I can't go out and about and do my business. It's enough that it's pleasant. People are nice to me. Sometimes people do nice things for me. So it's a good situation for me.
And when people do approach you, what are they most, well, you said this before, they recognize you from all sorts of different things.
Yeah. Yeah, usually. I mean, sometimes I'm surprised as to what it's a more obscure thing, but usually people have seen me in multiple things.
Now, you come to Vancouver, you like this city.
Yeah.
I remember reading a big article about you a few years ago in the Georgia Straight, where you were on the cover. So I think everyone in town here is aware of what you do somewhat.
Good.
Have you noticed a big difference in the audiences where you go? Like you said, in the United States, people take more offense to the work.
Yeah, in specifically what is it? I'll notice an edgier quality. It's not always true. I mean, I've had vocal elements in England as well, in the UK, but Canadians generally are very polite, and and it isn't just a politeness though. Like I say, I think there is a different, at least slightly different media system in Canada from the United States, and Canada has an awareness of a certain kind of propaganda that's been going on in the United States. Of course, it's worldwide; it goes on everywhere. But in the United States, the propaganda really has been that the United States is the number one country in the whole world, and it's the best place. And people believe that. You know, it's like, what? How could that be? How could anywhere be the best? This concept of, I mean, it doesn't make sense. None of it makes sense. You know, there are good qualities about different places all over the world, and these kind of separations of governments are separations, and they're not good things. People they don't want problems with each other. They want to learn from each other and figure out good things. And but these elements are real. It's a funny thing that one can easily be called a conspiracy theorist or something, but it has nothing to do with conspiracies. It has to do with a reality that I've experienced. When I was making What Is It, it was because of a frustration emotionally that I felt from the constraints, that I could feel that there were things that were psychological elements that were not being able to be dealt with in the corporate community that I work within. And again, I'm privileged and very happy to be working within that community and grateful to be working within it. But at the same time, I very much want a true kind of communication to be happening in our culture, which I don't think is happening.
What's your favorite movie that you've worked on?
I've had experiences that were very pleasant, personal experiences when working on films that were not necessarily my favorite cinematic elements, but it's also like cinematically in general. You know, I make my living as an actor, so I don't. It's not that I'm in films that are necessarily the films that I would go to see as a film viewer. It's very rare that I've been in a film that is a cinematic pleasure for me to watch. The first film that I acted in after Back to the Future, which when that film came out, I felt a certain obligation toward, and that had made so much money, I felt a certain obligation towards finding content that somehow psychologically reflected what my interests were. And the first film that I acted in after Back to the Future was River's Edge. That is a film that I like. I think it's
played the character of Lane. Yeah,
that's right. And I feel like there are interesting, good messages in that film, and I think it's a good film in general. I like that film. I had acted in a film when I was 19 at the American Film Institute called The Orkley Kid. It's only 35 minutes long, but that's a very good film. I like What Is It? You know, my own film.
Gosh, I didn't know you did What's Eating Gilbert Grape. I'm just looking at your press kit here. Gosh, that was a great movie. I'm surprised you didn't mention that.
Well, I had a good time on it, but it's you know, I really like Lasse Hallström and the director of the film, and I liked working with all the people. But you know, when I'm specifically talking about films, it is a good film, and I'm glad I'm in it. But as far as films that are really I have a slightly, I suppose a part of what I like things that have a slightly dark, at least a slightly dark element to them. And maybe there wasn't enough darkness in that film for my personal taste. It doesn't mean it's not a good film, but River's Edge does have a certain kind of darkness, and even the Orkley Kid, and certainly What Is It?
Who do you think is the best actor working in Hollywood today?
Boy, I'm not good at ever saying the best. Even without the question of who are the best in history, I don't have a single favorite. But amongst my favorites are people. Two of my favorite actors are Charles Laughton and Emile Jannings.
Mm-hmm. The horror films, right?
People often. No.
Charles Laughton
Jannings
did.
Was in the, well, not mostly. No, Charles Laughton. I mean, you might be thinking of Hunchback of Notre Dame, which is an incredible performance.
Yeah, it's a great movie.
You wouldn't really call it a horror. Lon Chaney was kind of known for horror, and he also played Hunchback of Notre Dame, so it might feel like.
I think I was getting him confused with Lon Chaney. Excuse me. You're right.
Yeah. But also, I mean, I love Lon Chaney, and it's a slightly different kind of element that I like about those performers. But Charles Laughton and Emile Jannings remind me of each other in certain ways. They were very good at getting to pathos. Somebody that's often cited as the greatest actor is Marlon Brando. And I do think Marlon Brando is one of the greatest actors ever. But something that I would critique, if you went to Marlon Brando and you said to him, "You're the greatest actor ever," he would not like it. He didn't like that. And frankly, and I don't mean to be demeaning Marlon Brando. I think he knew he was that isn't correct. He wasn't the greatest actor. He's one of them. But he did have limitations. And I would specifically say what the limitation is of Marlon Brando. Part of what's great about him is even if he's playing a character that's kind of being beaten down, there's almost always there's a feel of heroism. He feels like a hero, which is great. It's a great element about him. But Emile Jannings and Charles Laughton had a different element that is why I would slightly err on the side that I find it slightly even greater than Marlon Brando, because they have an element of pathos that is to me, that's a very difficult element to get.
Would you call it vulnerability?
Yeah. Charles Laughton, Hunchback of Notre Dame, and Emile Jannings in The Last Laugh. There are certain scenes where it's just, you feel just so horribly for them. Now, like Marlon Brando, it's actually kind of a funny film, but he played one of the same characters that Charles Laughton played in Night of the what's it called? The Island of Dr. Moreau.
Yes.
Or Dr. Moreau. They both played Dr. Moreau. And it's an interesting film to watch with both of them, because they both play the same scene essentially, where they die at the end. And when Charles Laughton dies, you feel there is a, like I say, there's a pathos. There's something that's kind of awful, but there's an enjoyability. There's an entertainment value, but there's something kind of terrible going on. When Marlon Brando dies, he dies a hero somehow. It is different. It is different. And it's not necessarily the best example, because there are other better examples of their work. Marlon Brando, maybe in Last Tango in Paris, I think he ends up somehow, again, there's pathos on some level with the story, but there's always an heroic element about him. Even in like his dying scene in The Godfather, there's a humor about it, but he kind of is struggling against the death. And whereas say Emile Jannings in the very last shot before the epilogue of The Last Laugh, he's sitting. He starts out to be a bellman who has kind of he's proud wearing this Weimar Republic uniform, long, beautiful uniform. He ends up being demoted at the very end of the film to a lavatory attendant, and there's just something. It has pathos. I can't put it any better. So now you were asking about today's actors. It's rare. It's something that I don't see happening in our film culture. We are not making a lot of films that deal with pathos, and I think it's something that I very much would like to see more of. Sometimes it happens. Every once in a while, there are some good actors that happens with, and but it's so exceedingly rare. It doesn't seem to be what I've been calling propaganda wants to deal with. Our propaganda wants to deal with heroes that are winning, and that the U.S. is number one, and it doesn't like to delve into pathos as much.
So it's a Friday night, and I want to do something. And I decide to go to the Crispin Glover show. What should I expect from the evening, and how long am I going to be out? And because this is not your usual evening of entertainment. This is unique.
That's right. It's long. It's a long show because first I come out in front of a screen and I present with images behind me a 1-hour dramatic narration of 8 different books. And then after that, I perform that hour. I present either What Is It, the film What Is It, or if I'm performing what's called Crispin Glover's Slideshow Part 2, I'm presenting It Is Fine, Everything Is Fine. What Is It is a 72-minute feature film, and It Is Fine, Everything Is Fine is a 74-minute film. I play them on subsequent nights. And after the film comes out, I have approximately anywhere from a 45-minute to, I've had it go as long as an hour and a half, but I try to keep it shorter than that. I try to keep it at about an hour at its longest. But I can feel if the audience is a particularly inquisitive or volatile even audience. Then after the Q&A, I'm out in the lobby and I have a book signing, and I make sure I'm there till every single person that is in line has had whatever the question they want to ask for a book signed or what have you. And I won't book the show if they make it so I can't be there. I've been at venues as late as 4:30 in the morning. It's not what I want to happen. I prefer if I get out around midnight or 1 o'clock or so. But it depends on the size of the audience. Usually, it ends by about 1 or something. But it really does depend. I have a feeling my show in Canada, in Ontario at the Mayfair Theatre in Ottawa, something tells me that's going to be a pretty well-attended show, because I haven't been there since the 90s. And as I recall, I had a good show there way back then. So I think that might go a little bit late, but you never know. But it's at least a 4 hours, a 4 hour plus experience.
Well, that's amazing. This day and age, you're lucky if you get 2 hours of entertainment out of anything you go to see. Yeah,
I mean, it's like on one hand, I feel like maybe it's a little too long, but on the other hand, I've had criticism. Sometimes people, of course, have to get up or leave or catch a train or something, and they want my Q&A to be over, and they want me to sign a book or something. And I feel a little bad about that. If somebody came to a show and they couldn't stay late that night, they could probably come to another show and wouldn't have to be charged to come in and get a book.
Why don't you just hire the actor from Back to the Future Part 2 to do the signing while you're doing the show?
Well, I guess
nobody will know the difference.
Be cut in a lawsuit with myself if I did that.
I don't see a scheduled day for Vancouver, BC here, but
no, but
you're going to be in town.
I'll come back. Last time I came in to the Pacific Cinematheque, we talked about that I should come on a more regular basis because Vancouver really has been a great city for me, and basically we always sell out every time I'm there, so I need to come back a little more often. Certain cities I shouldn't come back more often than every year and a half or 2 years because I need the be able to have enough interest media-wise to come and properly promote the shows. But the Cinematheque is one of these venues that essentially they have enough of a mailing list and a active viewer element that I can come back every year or so. And I definitely plan to come up to Vancouver relatively soon, but I don't have anything scheduled right now. But it's a great city.
And of course, if anyone wants to check out what you're doing, they can go to www.crispinglover.com.
Yeah, and the best way for people to know is actually to sign up for the newsletter. They'll get a lot of emails because I email people every time I have a show. If somebody doesn't want to get as many emails, there's also an official Crispin, Helly and Glover Facebook page, and then there's a Crispin Glover Twitter, and those things give information as well. But the best way is the newsletter. But all of these social media elements have been incredibly important. And coming on shows like yours, it's all of this stuff kind of aligned to what we were talking about, the more political elements. There's a kind of communication that's happening that it's reaching a kind of critical mass that really it's good for individual things like myself, and it would be great if it was good for social aspects at large, which I think could be happening. It'd be nice.
Crispin, it's been an honor having you on the show. Real privilege.
I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you very much.